In the shadows of America's justice system, there are stories that remind us of the darkest potential in youth. Today, we explore 6 of the most brutal cases where teenagers barely out of childhood were convicted of unimaginable crimes and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But before we dive in, if you're interested in true crime documentaries that dig deep into history and humanity, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. First up, the shocking murder that horrified a small town in 1990. Case 1. Manuel. On July 27, 1990, in the tough streets of Tampa, Florida, 13-year-old Manuel became entangled in a robbery that changed his life forever. Now in his late 40s, Ian spent 26 years behind bars, including 18 in solitary confinement, before his release in 2016 following legal battles that reshaped juvenile sentencing. He was originally sentenced to life without parole for attempted first-degree murder and armed robbery. To understand what led to this tragedy, we step back to Ian's early years. Born into poverty in Tampa's Ybor City projects, Ian grew up amid crack cocaine epidemics, violence, and neglect. His mother struggled with addiction, and by age 10, Ian was in foster care, facing abuse and instability. School records showed a bright but troubled boy, with no prior violent offenses but exposure to gangs and survival on the streets. In the weeks before the crime, older teens in his neighborhood pressured Ian to prove loyalty by joining a robbery crew. Motivated by fear and a desire for acceptance, Ian agreed, later admitting it was a desperate bid to belong in a world that offered him no other options. The events unfolded step by step on that humid July evening. Around 11 p.m., Ian and 3 older boys ages 15, 16, and 17 spotted 34-year-old Debbie Bakery walking home from work in downtown Tampa. She was a young mother, married, and known in her community for her kindness. The group approached her under a streetlight, demanding her purse. Bakery resisted, clutching it tightly and pleading for mercy. One boy handed Ian a .300 caliber pistol, instructing him to handle it. Trembling but caught in the moment, Ian fired once, the shot grazing Bakery's jaw and shattering her teeth. She collapsed, bleeding profusely but alive as the group fled into the night. The brutality stemmed from the needless violence. No money was taken, and the profound betrayal of targeting an innocent woman walking home. Ian's youth and the peer pressure amplified the senselessness. He later described it as a stupid, scared mistake driven by survival instincts in a violent environment. In the immediate aftermath, Ian didn't run far. Overwhelmed by guilt, he turned himself into police the next day, confessing fully and expressing remorse. The other boys were arrested soon after, but Ian's cooperation didn't spare him. He was held in juvenile detention initially, but Florida's Get Tough on Crime laws transferred him to adult court. Key evidence included Bakery's identification of Ian from a photo lineup, the recovered pistol with his fingerprints, and ballistic matches to the bullet. Ian's detailed confession corroborated witness accounts of the group's movements. Charged with attempted first-degree murder and armed robbery, his trial in late 1990 was swift. Despite his age and lack of prior violence, the judge accepted his guilty plea on advice from his overworked public defender, who promised a lenient 15-year sentence. On December 1990, Ian was sentenced to life without parole, the mandatory minimum for the charges under Florida law. Legal developments marked Ian's case profoundly. Appeals citing his youth and ineffective counsel were denied initially, but in 2010, the U.S. Florida banned life without parole for juveniles in non-homicide cases like attempted murder. Florida courts applied this retroactively in Ian's favor in 2010, vacating his sentence. After resentencing to 60 years, further advocacy by the Equal Justice Initiative led to his release on November 11, 2016 after 26 years served. Bakery, the victim, forgave him years earlier and supported his freedom, highlighting restorative justice. Ian's background revealed a child shaped by poverty and trauma, with no violent priors but undiagnosed mental health struggles from his environment. In prison, he endured 18 years in solitary, writing poetry that kept him sane and led to his memoir, My Time Will Come. Public controversies included debates over juvenile sentencing and solitary's cruelty, drawing international attention from human rights groups. The case influenced Florida reforms, reducing JLW for non-homicide offenses, and underscored community impacts like Bakery's advocacy for second chances. Ian's story is a testament to redemption's possibility, but as we reflect on Ian's journey from a scared boy to a poet and advocate, it raises tough questions about where the line is drawn for young offenders, and our next case takes us to even darker depths of depravity in What happens when a teen's rage turns into something truly monstrous? Case 2. Christa Gail Pike. On January 12, 1995, in Knoxville, Tennessee, 18-year-old Christa Gail Pike committed one of the most gruesome murders in the state's history. Now in her late 40s, Christa remains on death row in Tennessee's Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center, originally sentenced to life without parole for the brutal murder of her Job Corps classmate, Colleen Slemmer, though her sentence was later converted to death row due to aggravating factors. Let's step back to understand the lead-up to this horrific crime. Christa grew up in a turbulent home in West Virginia, marked by parental neglect and alleged physical abuse. By 17, she dropped out of high school and enrolled in the Job Corps program in Knoxville, seeking a fresh start. There, she met 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer, a fellow student described as kind and hard-working. But tensions brewed. Christa, who had a volatile personality and a history of petty theft, became jealous of Colleen, believing she was spreading rumors and competing for the affection of Christa's boyfriend, 17-year-old Tadderell Shipp. Court records later revealed Christa's diary, where she wrote about wanting to get rid of Colleen to secure her relationship. Over days, Christa planned the attack, enlisting Shipp and another friend, 18-year-old Shadolla Peterson, to lure Colleen to an isolated spot. Her motive was a toxic mix of jealousy and a desire to assert dominance, later admitting she wanted Colleen to suffer. The crime unfolded with chilling brutality on that cold January night. Around 8 p.m., Christa convinced Colleen to join her Shipp and Peterson for a peace talk at a secluded wooded area near the University of Tennessee campus. Colleen, trusting the invitation, followed them. Once alone, Christa's demeanor shifted. She accused Colleen of flirting with Shipp, sparking an argument. Without warning, Christa pulled a box cutter from her pocket and slashed Colleen's throat, the blade slicing through skin as Colleen gasped and stumbled. As Colleen tried to flee, Christa and Shipp tackled her to the ground. Over the next 30 minutes, they took turns beating her with fists and a rock, fracturing her skull. Christa carved a pentagram into Colleen's chest with the box cutter, a deliberate act of mutilation, and crushed her head with a chunk of asphalt, ensuring her death. The torture was relentless. Colleen endured over 300 cuts and blows, her body left unrecognizable. Christa kept a piece of Colleen's skull as a trophy, later showing it off to friends. The motive was pure spite, amplified by the sadistic overkill that shocked even hardened investigators. After the murder, Christa and her accomplices returned to their dorm, laughing and boasting about the killing. Christa hid the skull fragment in her room and tossed the bloody box cutter into a trash bin. For 2 days, she acted normal, attending classes, but rumors spread when she showed the skull to a friend. On January 14, 1995, police, tipped off by Job Corps students, found Colleen's body and arrested Christa after searching her dorm, where they recovered the skull and bloody clothing. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA on the box cutter matched Colleen. The skull fragment was identified via forensic analysis, and Peterson testified against Christa, detailing the planned attack. Charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy, Christa's 1996 trial was a media frenzy. The defense argued her abusive childhood and possible borderline personality disorder, but the prosecution emphasized the premeditation and torture. On March 29, 1996, she was convicted and sentenced to death, though initially considered for life without parole until aggravating factors, torture and mutilation were applied. Shipp received life with parole eligibility, and Peterson got probation for testifying. On death row, Christa has been involved in violent incidents, including a 2001 attempt to strangle another inmate, and her appeals, citing her youth and mental health, have been denied, most recently in 2020. Her background showed no prior violent convictions but a history of instability and untreated trauma. The case drew national attention for its savagery, fueling debates over women on death row and juvenile sentencing. As Christa was barely 18, Knoxville's Job Corps tightened security, and Colleen's family established a memorial scholarship, leaving a lasting community impact. Case 3. Lionel Tate. On July 28, 1999, in Pembroke Park, Florida, 12-year-old Lionel Tate committed a crime that stunned the nation, becoming one of the youngest Americans ever sentenced to life without parole. Now in his late 30s, Lionel was released in 2004 after his sentence was overturned, but his case remains a landmark in juvenile justice for the murder of 6-year-old Tiffany Eunick. Let's trace the path to this tragedy. Lionel grew up in a working-class home, raised by his mother, Kathleen Grossett Tate, a Florida Highway Patrol trooper. He was a large child, weighing over 170 pounds at 12, with a history of behavioral issues, including school suspensions for fighting. On that July day, Lionel's mother was babysitting Tiffany, the daughter of a family friend, at their home. Lionel and Tiffany were playmates, but court records later showed Lionel's fascination with professional wrestling, mimicking moves like body slams. His mother warned him to stop roughhousing, but Lionel ignored her. The motive wasn't malice but reckless imitation. He later claimed he was playing wrestling and didn't mean to hurt Tiffany. The crime unfolded in a matter of minutes but with devastating consequences. Around 7 p.m., while Kathleen was upstairs, Lionel and Tiffany were alone in the living room watching TV. Lionel, inspired by wrestling moves, lifted Tiffany, who weighed just 48 pounds, and threw her onto the floor, mimicking a powerbomb. She cried out, but he continued, slamming her against a table, the impact fracturing her skull. He stomped on her chest, breaking her ribs, and kicked her, causing internal bleeding. Tiffany's injuries, over 35 in total, including a lacerated liver, were catastrophic, akin to a fall from a building. Lionel later said he thought she was playing dead. When Kathleen returned, Tiffany was unresponsive and paramedics couldn't revive her. The brutality lay in the sheer force applied by a 12-year-old to a much smaller child, unintentional but reckless. After the incident, Lionel didn't flee. He told his mother Tiffany was sleeping, but her obvious injuries prompted a 911 call. Police arrived within minutes, arresting Lionel that night after he admitted to wrestling too hard. He was initially charged as a juvenile, but Florida prosecutors, citing the severity, tried him as an adult. Key evidence included the autopsy report detailing Tiffany's extensive injuries, Lionel's confession to mimicking wrestling moves, and medical testimony ruling out accidental death due to the force used. Charged with first-degree murder, his 2001 trial sparked debate over trying a 12-year-old as an adult. The defense argued Lionel's immaturity and lack of intent, citing possible ADHD, but the prosecution emphasized the injury's severity. On January 25, 2001, he was convicted and sentenced to life without parole, a mandatory sentence under Florida law for first-degree murder. Legal developments were significant. In 2003, an appeals court overturned the conviction, citing ineffective counsel and Lionel's age, resentencing him to time served and 10 years probation. Released in 2004, he later violated probation with new offenses, e.g., armed robbery in 2005, serving additional time. His background showed no prior violent crimes but behavioral issues and an unstable home. The case drew international attention, with groups like Amnesty International criticizing juvenile life sentences. It spurred Florida to review juvenile sentencing laws, and Tiffany's mother became an advocate for child safety, leaving a lasting community impact. But what happens when a teen's crime is driven by a calculated choice to kill? Case 4. Antonio Nuez. On April 13, 1999, in the gang-ridden streets of south-central Los Angeles, 14-year-old Antonio Nuez became entangled in a high-speed chase that ended in tragedy. Now in his late 30s, Antonio was released in 2017 after serving 18 years in a California prison, originally sentenced to life without parole for armed kidnapping and attempted murder, a non-homicide crime that later became a landmark case in juvenile justice reform. Let's go back to the events that led to this chaos. Antonio grew up in a poverty-stricken neighborhood, surrounded by gang violence and neglect. His father was absent, and his mother struggled to support 3 children. By 13, Antonio was drawn to the Crips gang, seeking protection and belonging. School records noted truancy and minor thefts, but no violent priors. In early 1999, a feud with a rival gang escalated, and Antonio, eager to prove his loyalty, joined older gang members in a plan to kidnap a rival, 19-year-old Marcus Lee, to settle a score over drug territory. The motive was to intimidate, not kill, but the plan spiraled out of control. Antonio carried a stolen .22 caliber pistol provided by a 20-year-old gang leader, and they targeted Lee's apartment complex. The crime unfolded with reckless intensity on that April evening. Around 9 p.m., Antonio and 2 accomplices, ages 18 and 20, spotted Lee leaving his apartment. They forced him into a stolen van at gunpoint, Antonio holding the pistol to Lee's head as they drove off. Lee begged for his life, but the older accomplices demanded he reveal rival hideouts. When Lee resisted, the driver sped through Los Angeles, leading police on a high-speed chase after a bystander called 911. During the pursuit, Antonio fired 2 shots out the van's window at pursuing officers, missing them but striking a patrol car. The chase ended when the van crashed into a fence, and Lee was thrown out, suffering broken ribs but surviving. The brutality lay in the reckless endangerment, kidnapping a rival and shooting at police, driven by gang loyalty and Antonio's youthful impulsivity, though no one died. After the crash, Antonio fled on foot, tossing the pistol into an alley. He hid at a friend's house for 2 days, but police tracked him down on April 15, 1999, after recovering the gun and matching his fingerprints. Lee identified Antonio as the gunman, and the older accomplices turned state's witness to reduce their sentences. The evidence was airtight. Fingerprints on the gun, ballistic matches to the patrol car, Lee's testimony, and security footage of the van. Charged with kidnapping, attempted murder of a police officer, and gang enhancements, Antonio's 2001 trial was emotionally charged. Tried as an adult under California's Proposition 21, the defense argued his youth and gang coercion, citing untreated trauma from an abusive childhood, but the prosecution emphasized the public danger of his actions. On June 12, 2001, he was convicted and sentenced to life without parole, a mandatory sentence for the charges despite his age. Legal developments were pivotal. In 2010, the Supreme Court's Graham v. Florida ruling banned life without parole for juveniles in non-homicide cases. Antonio's case was reviewed, and in 2017 he was resentenced to 25 years to life, gaining parole eligibility. Released that year, he now works with anti-gang programs. His background showed no violent priors but exposure to gang culture and possible PTSD. The case drew attention from the Equal Justice Initiative, sparking debates over non-homicide juvenile sentences. It led to Los Angeles expanding youth intervention programs, and Lee's survival highlighted the potential for rehabilitation over punishment. Case 5, Quantel Lotz. On November, now in his late 30s, Quantel remains in a Missouri prison, serving a life sentence without parole for the murder of his 17-year-old stepbrother, Michael Barton, in a moment of explosive rage. Let's trace the path to this tragedy. Quantel grew up in a chaotic home, marked by poverty and domestic violence. His mother married Michael's father when Quantel was 10, blending two troubled families. Quantel and Michael clashed constantly, with Michael, older and larger, often bullying him. School records noted Quantel's struggles with anger and suspensions for fighting, but no prior violent crimes. In the days before the crime, tensions escalated over a trivial dispute. Michael took Quantel's PlayStation, mocking him as weak. Quantel, feeling humiliated, grabbed a kitchen knife from their apartment, intending to scare Michael into returning it. His motive was rooted in sibling rivalry and a desperate need for respect in a home where he felt powerless. The crime unfolded in a fleeting but fatal moment. Around 6 p.m. as their parents were at work, Quantel confronted Michael in their shared bedroom. Michael laughed off the knife, shoving Quantel against a wall. Enraged, Quantel lunged, stabbing Michael once in the chest, the blade piercing his heart. Michael staggered, collapsing onto the bed, blood soaking the sheets as he gasped for air. Panicked, Quantel dropped the knife and tried to apply pressure to the wound, but Michael died within minutes. The brutality lay in the single lethal strike, a spontaneous act driven by unchecked anger rather than premeditation, yet devastating in its outcome. After the stabbing, Quantel didn't flee. Overwhelmed, he sat beside Michael's body, crying, until his mother returned an hour later and called 911. Police arrested Quantel that night, November 2, 1999, after he admitted to the stabbing, saying, "I didn't mean to kill him." He was held in juvenile detention but transferred to adult court due to Missouri's laws on serious crimes. The evidence was clear: the knife with Quantel's fingerprints, his confession, and blood on his clothes matching Michael's DNA. Charged with first-degree murder, his 2002 trial was brief but divisive. The defense argued Quantel's youth, impulsivity, and abusive home environment, suggesting undiagnosed emotional disorders. The prosecution, however, pointed to the deliberate act of grabbing the knife. On August 15, 2002, Quantel was convicted and sentenced to life without parole, mandatory for first-degree murder in Missouri. Despite his age, legal developments followed. The 2012 Miller v. Alabama ruling banned mandatory life without parole for juveniles, prompting a 2016 resentencing hearing for Quantel. However, Missouri upheld his sentence, citing the crime's severity, though he remains eligible for future parole reviews. His background showed no violent priors but a history of trauma and neglect. The case drew attention from advocacy groups like the Sentencing Project, fueling debates over juvenile sentencing in Missouri. It led to community efforts to address family violence, and Michael's father became an advocate for youth counseling, leaving a lasting impact. But what happens when a teen's actions force a nation to rethink punishment itself? Case 6, Evan Miller. On July 15, 2003, in the small town of Moulton, Alabama, 14-year-old Evan Miller committed a crime that would not only shatter a family, but also reshape the landscape of juvenile justice in America. Now in his late 30s, Evan was released in 2023 after serving 20 years in an Alabama prison, originally sentenced to life without parole for the murder of his neighbor, 52-year-old Cole Cannon, in a case that reached the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's unravel the events leading to this tragedy. Evan grew up in a trailer park plagued by poverty, abuse, and neglect. His mother struggled with drug addiction, and his stepfather was physically abusive, beating Evan regularly. By 13, Evan had attempted suicide multiple times and was diagnosed with depression, though untreated. School records noted truancy and fights, but no prior violent convictions. In the summer of 2003, Evan and his 16-year-old friend Colby Smith often hung out with Cole Cannon, a neighbor known for selling drugs but also offering the boys food and a place to crash. On July 14, Evan learned Cole had shorted his mother on a drug deal, sparking anger.
Fueled by alcohol and marijuana, Evan decided to confront Cole, intending to steal money and drugs to teach him a lesson. His motive was a mix of personal grievance and impulsive rage, amplified by his chaotic upbringing. The crime unfolded with escalating brutality that night. Around 11 p.m., Evan and Colby knocked on Cole's trailer door, pretending to want to buy drugs. Cole, drunk and unsuspecting, let them in. They sat drinking together for an hour, but the mood shifted when Evan accused Cole of cheating his mother. An argument erupted, and Cole shoved Evan, laughing off the accusation. Enraged, Evan grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of the trailer and swung it at Cole's head, the metal cracking against his skull, sending him to the floor. Blood dripped as Cole groaned. Still conscious, Colby joined in, kicking Cole's ribs, while Evan swung the bat again, fracturing Cole's jaw and arm. Over 20 minutes, they beat him relentlessly, the trailer echoing with thuds and Cole's fading pleas. In a final act of desperation to cover their tracks, Evan doused the trailer with gasoline from a can in Cole's shed and lit a match, setting the trailer ablaze. Cole died from smoke inhalation and blunt force trauma, his body charred when firefighters arrived. The brutality lay in the prolonged beating and the calculated arson, driven by Evan's anger and fear of consequences. After the murder, Evan and Colby fled to a nearby friend's house, burning their bloody clothes in a backyard fire pit. Evan bragged to a neighbor about handling Cole, but the boast backfired. On July 17, 2003, police, tipped off by the neighbor, arrested Evan at his trailer after finding the bat hidden under his bed, still stained with Cole's blood. Colby confessed, implicating Evan as the primary aggressor. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA on the bat matched Cole, gasoline traces on Evan's shoes, and Colby's testimony detailing the attack. Charged with capital murder and arson, Evan's 2004 trial was tried in adult court under Alabama law. The defense highlighted his abusive childhood, mental health issues, and intoxication, arguing diminished capacity. The prosecution, however, emphasized the premeditation and cruelty. On August 10, 2006, Evan was convicted and sentenced to life without parole, mandatory for capital murder in Alabama, despite his age. Legal developments defined Evan's case. In 2012, his conviction became the basis for the landmark Supreme Court case Miller v. Alabama, which banned mandatory life without parole for juveniles, citing their developmental immaturity. Evan's sentence was reviewed, and in 2023, he was resentenced to 40 years with parole eligibility, leading to his release after 20 years served. His background showed no violent priors but severe trauma, including foster care stints and undiagnosed PTSD. The case drew national attention from groups like the Equal Justice Initiative, sparking reforms in juvenile sentencing laws across the U.S. Moulton's community grappled with the loss, and Cole's family advocated for stronger drug rehabilitation programs, leaving a lasting legacy. These 6 cases, from a scared boy in a gang to a teen consumed by rage, force us to confront the complexities of youth, trauma, and justice. Each story leaves a scar on the communities and families involved, raising questions that linger long after the verdicts. What do you think pushes a teenager to commit such brutal acts? Is it their environment, their choices, or something deeper we haven't yet understood? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this video moved you, hit that subscribe button to join us for more stories that uncover the truth behind the headlines.